Hello everybody. I'm wearing my detective jacket today because honestly I'm probably going to take it off because I look like a loser. I look like Elliot Stabler from SVU. But I'm wearing this jacket today because today marks... what am I talking about? Today I am filming the first episode of a personally long-awaited series on my channel. If you've been watching me basically at all for the past year, I've been going on and on and on about doing a drunk conspiracy series. I don't really know what to call it yet because really the only point behind doing this is just to combine two of my favorite things: drinking alcohol and talking about stuff. So really, I want this series to be about me learning shit, teaching you guys about it while getting drunk. To be honest, it's 3:30 p.m. right now and I'm drinking wine in a leather jacket and talking about cannibals. But most of the time this series is going to be about anything I find interesting. So anything from like mermaids to fairy tales to mythological creatures, ancient lost cities, anything. But for the first episode I wanted to pick something that I feel like there's like a general consensus of interest. I don't know why everybody finds serial killers so fascinating. It's kind of concerning. Today's video we're going to be talking about the different types of profiling for serial killers, what the motives and the psychology behind it is, and their kind of gratification that comes with it. And then I'm going to talk about a few of the like most notorious and honestly feral serial killers. And then at the end I kind of want to have a discussion and prompt some questions about how you guys feel about serial killers. How do I word that? I don't know. Basically, I don't want it to come across as if I'm like trying to evoke sympathy for serial killers. I just feel like if you look at it at face value, that's one thing, but then to go that step further and look at their childhood and try and figure out like a cause and effect for the way that they are. And so first and foremost, I need to make two disclaimers. The first one is I don't want to come across as like callous, so I just want to send out my sympathies and respects to the victims, the victim family, anyone who will be like offended or grossed out by the stuff I'm going to talk about. And then that brings me to my second disclaimer, which is if you are triggered by any kind of topics that are revolving around serial killers or just criminals in general, we're going to be talking about some bricked up stuff. You get me? Like if you don't want to hear about that stuff, then just click off because we're going to be talking about it. So the first thing I feel like we need to clarify is the definition of a serial killer. Fun fact, actually, the term serial killer and what we now know that it means was only really coined in the 80s. I think it was 81 or something like that. It was used in the newspapers. Before this, they were mass murderers. And if you know the definition of a mass murderer, is someone in a single event that might experience a psychotic break and in one time they would kill like 4 or more people. And just hearing that, you definitely know that that doesn't really account for what we generally believe a serial killer to be. The FBI has a different definition for them, but the National Institute of Justice defines a serial killer as it involves committing 2 or more murders with a psychological motive and sadistic sexual overtones. I'm going to be talking about sadistic quite a bit because quite frankly, if you're a serial killer, most of the time there is a bit of sadism going on there. Basically, a sadist or a sadistic person is someone who derives like gratification or pleasure from the pain of others or inflicting pain on other people.
Very amusing.
Now the reason we have the word serial killers and what we now understand as serial killers, our current profiling, all that sort of stuff, is because if you've seen Mindhunters, you would know a lot about this. But it was actually real life FBI agents Robert Ressler and John E. Douglas decided they wanted to take it upon themselves to dive deeper into the mind of mass murderers and try and come up with like a pattern, like a patternized behavior or like sequential kind of motive, I guess. So they interviewed then labeled mass murderers Ed Kemper, John Wayne Gacy, Son of Sam, David Berkowitz. Shut up! And because of this, now we have 4 main profiling for serial killers, which we will fully get into. The first one is power and control. This one's probably the most commonly seen or talked about or just portrayed because in my opinion it's probably the most interesting. They are just true sociopaths and live life by their own set of rules. Power and control killers derive their sexual gratification through just completely humiliating their victims. Not just humiliating, but like controlling, dominating, having power over someone. These types of killers, you've got Jeffrey Dahmer, which we'll talk about, Ted Bundy, I would probably say John Wayne Gacy, Ed Kemper. These killers are most likely to rape the victim before, during, and a lot of the time as well they will come back to the corpse, and this is like a further implication of they're just completely having control over this corpse. These killers as well typically enjoy the entire process of killing, the stalking, the torturing, the capturing, but the killing in itself is like the final climax. To have the power to decide when and how this person dies is the full expression of their power and control over this person, and so usually they will prolong it for as long as they can to fulfill their sadistic fantasies. As well, cannibalism is probably fitting into this section the most because it's a way of having that person with you forever because you ingested them, and a lot of the time they'll take like a memento or like a souvenir with them so that they can sustain that feeling of gratification and power, and it's something that like only they know about. Ted Bundy stole a necklace from one of his victims and he gave it to his wife as a present, and so every time he looked at her it was like this little secret that only he knew, and it was like this further just push of his power. And then next you've got mission oriented. When I think of mission oriented, I feel like KKK, Hitler comes to mind. These people just seek to improve the world based on their own like bias, pretty much. They think they're cleansing the world and doing their duty by targeting people and killing people that they just don't think are allowed to be alive. That's pretty much it. They're generally not considered psychotic either, so they're literally just doing their duty. And then you've got visionary killers, which generally are considered psychotic because that's basically their whole thing. They usually have a predisposition to mental health issues or other psychosis related things. These killers kill by command of what they think is by command of other people. A lot of the time when they're killing, they say that they had a blank and someone else was controlling them and choosing who they were killing, and they had no idea. They woke up and they didn't know what happened. A lot of the time they think it's like the word of God or the word of Satan. These killers, it's really hard to find a pattern because their killings are most of the time pretty arbitrary. Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, he is probably the most infamous visionary killer, but he's not actually a visionary killer. When he went to jail, he said that he would go out and shoot people at the word of his neighbor Sam, who he thought was possessed by the devil, but when he was declared legally sane, he dropped it and said it was a hoax, and now he's found God, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if he was trying to like, he just made up the whole story so that he could get off from going to jail for a really long time, and then when they said, oh no, you're fine, it's like, oh okay, I just made that shit up anyway, guys. And then the last classification of a killer is a hedonistic serial killer. Hedonistic is basically the pursuit of happiness, I guess. It's kind of just finding gratification in self-indulgence, whatever that self-indulgence is. In this case, it's broken up into 3 different sections. You've got your hedonistic lust killer, so the self-indulgence is their lust. Then you've got thrill killer, and then you've got comfort killer. Lust killer I feel like is basically the same as a power and control killer. I don't know, it's kind of hard to differentiate, so we don't really talk about that one because I don't really get it. And then you've got a thrill killer. I feel like Son of Sam fits better into a thrill killer because he actually would taunt the police a lot. He sent them, I think he sent them letters, which is basically the same as a Zodiac killer. But with a thrill killer, their main thing is basically attracting as much attention as they can. It's not necessarily about the killing itself. The killing's kind of more of a formality, I would say, to get the attention that they want. A lot of the time they'll taunt the police, or they just want to instill as much fear and trauma in their victims and world, pretty much. So for a thrill killer, the stalking and the capturing is euphoric for them. It's like a game, and they strive usually for the perfect kill, and they think that they're unstoppable. So it's just fully like a game for them. Thrill killers kind of seem like the opposite of power and control killer because it's not so much the power and control of the victim as much. It's like controlling the way other people see them, like instilling fear in just the general public around them. And there was not really any sexual aspect to it a lot of the time. And then the last hedonistic killer is a comfort killer. This goes back the most, I would probably say. You've got like bandits, pirates, black Black Widow husband killers. A comfort killer is someone who seeks comfort through killing people, whether it be for financial gain or just quality of life. Obviously back then it was pretty common because quality of life was just lower, you know, their justice system was looser. Whenever I play Red Dead Redemption 2, I always am walking around, and if I stand too close to someone, or if I look for someone for too long, or if I just like go somewhere where I'm not meant to be, they'll be like, piss off, and then I don't, and then they just shoot me, and I'm like, why? I was supposed to let them kill me to prove a point, but they were taking like too long and it was getting embarrassing. So for argument's sake, let's just pretend that they could take down someone such as myself. Most of the time they'll kill someone within the family or a neighbor or a close friend or acquaintance, and they will usually start off as like tax fraud or embezzlement or not paying debts, stuff like that, petty crimes, and then graduate onto murder for comfort. So yeah, moving on. So now hopefully you have like a general understanding of the 4 main types of serial killers. I found this so interesting when I was researching it all, and now I feel like I do like a little game because my mom's obsessed with true crime documentaries and like serial killer shows, but whenever I'm watching those things I try and like figure out what kind of profiling they would fit into. It's really interesting just getting in the mind possibly why they are this way or what kind of profiling they fit into. It's super interesting. So now I'm going to talk about a few serial killers. I wish I had time to go into a serial killer for like every section. I really want to get into their childhoods and try and see a pattern, so let's get into it. The first person I'm going to talk about for power and control, I don't even know if he's technically a serial killer because of how notorious he is and the inspiration, the change in the horror film industry, and just the way people saw serial killers after him. It's going to get super gross. Here we go. This man was the inspiration for quite a few movie characters, none other than Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. If you're a scary movie fan, I'm sure you've seen Silence of the Lambs and know who Buffalo Bill is. The man who would kidnap oversized women and then starve them and then murder them and then take their skin and make it into a woman suit.
Rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
You're gonna see a running theme here. He also influenced the idea for Norman Bates from Psycho and Bates Motel. I watched Psycho for research purposes, and I feel like Norman Bates is probably the closest to the guy we're going to be talking about. And then you've got Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I tried to look up this movie to watch it for research. Wasn't anywhere. I'm not kidding, I couldn't even rent it, so I'm guessing it's messed up. I did a lot of research on him. Messed up. And then lastly, you've got Bloody Face from American Horror Story Asylum, aka best American Horror Story season in my humble opinion. If you haven't seen this season, I don't want to ruin who Bloody Face is, but if you've seen it, you know. Just this deranged serial killer who kidnapped and killed women and made their skin into like a woman suit and a mask and a bunch of gross shit. As you can see, there's a bit of a running theme here. Skin, women's skin, and making it into stuff. Yeah, so we're talking about Ed Gein today. I feel like Ed Gein isn't really talked about a lot, but he's just so much. His childhood is messed. So Ed Gein had an older brother named Henry, and he lived with his mum and his dad. His dad was an abusive alcoholic, and his mum was just a fanatically religious woman, like completely domineering and just, yeah. There's just too much to get into about Ed and Henry's mum, but I'll try and cover the bases so you get a general gist of what kind of woman she was. Basically, she moved her family out to Plainsfield, Wisconsin on this 195-acre farm that was just completely isolated. But the reason she moved her whole family is because she wanted her family to be far away from ungodly people of the world and sinful situations. She also made both of her sons swear to be virgins forever, and she used to verbally abuse them because she thought that they were going to end up like their loser father, and she just didn't want that to happen. She just hated him for some reason, and she hated sex, she hated women, she hated men, but she loved God. There was even a point where she caught Ed masturbating in the bath, and she grabbed his genitals and said, "These are the curse of a man," and made him swear again that he would never lose his virginity. You can just see a lot of like sexual suppression and like this force of like an idea of what people are and what women are. She used to tell her sons that all women, besides her of course, were whores, and instruments of Satan and deserve to be treated with hatred. Even upon the trial of Ed Gein, he would get a tear in his eye when he was talking about his mother and just said, she's everything a woman is meant to be. She would get Ed to sleep in her bed, but then also would like verbally and physically abuse him, and if he ever tried to make friends at school, she would abuse him. But his situation at school wasn't even really that good anyway, because he loved reading, but every time he read in class, his classmates would bully him because he had a lesion on his tongue, kind of made him speak a bit weird, and he had like a lazy eye, so he was bullied a lot in school. He would come home crying a lot, and then his dad would beat him up until his ears would start ringing, and then his mum, even when he tried to make friends, would verbally abuse him. So there was just a lot of confusion and a lot of isolation going on when he was younger. Then, as I said, their dad died later on, so it was literally just the two boys and the mum. I've got to take my jacket off because I'm actually sweating bullets. But fast forward a bit, Ed and Henry would help out in town a lot, I guess. They would babysit a lot. Ed loved hanging out with kids because he said he just got them better, like he liked hanging out with them. So they were pretty like active in town, and everyone in town kind of trusted them. But Henry still had a lot to say about their mum. He openly criticized her quite a bit in front of Ed. I don't know whether he was trying to like push him away from her a bit because he thought that their relationship was unhealthy. He kind of questioned their relationship and said it was weird, which actually makes it really interesting because it kind of highlights the fact that being a serial killer could be something that's just innate, like it's a dormant thing that could be awoken by environmental factors, because Henry and Ed pretty much had the exact same upbringing, but somehow Henry was like could understand boundaries and that his mum wasn't God, you know, but Ed was just completely attached to her. And then Henry died in a house fire. When the police came, they found out that he was actually dead before the fire actually even started, but they didn't think that Ed was capable of killing anybody, which is portentous, so they just ruled it out as asphyxiation. And so then it was literally just Ed and his mum. Ed's mum got sick, she had a stroke and she was hospitalized for a bit, and then after that she was just basically bedridden, so Ed just had to take care of her. There was a lot of him sleeping in her bed with her, him just taking care of her and her needing him. But then she died. Ed reacted to this, as you can imagine, not very well. He became just completely reclusive. He boarded up the 2 rooms that she would spend most of her time in as kind of like a museum to her, and then it got even worse and he ended up only living in 2 of the rooms, and the rest of the house was just completely boarded up, like literally like a shrine to her, as if she'd never died. So I forgot to say, his mum was a bit concerned because his reading started getting really weird. He would start reading books about like grave robbing, head shrinking and human anatomy and stuff, and it was getting kind of weird. She was kind of freaked out naturally. But only 18 months after Augusta, his mum, died, he started acting on these impulses. He said that he would just feel these impulses to go to the cemetery, and he would have voices in his head telling him to do things, and finally he gave in to these voices and he went to the cemetery where his mum was buried, and he dug her up and he twisted her head off her shoulders and he shrunk it like it says in his books. And yeah, after this he started making nocturnal visits to the cemetery, or just different cemeteries in his area, like 40 times, and 9 of those times he took bodies of women who like had just died and who were around the same age as his mum, and he would take their bodies and take what he wanted of their bodies and then put them back in their grave. And then I'm guessing at some point he either got like bored of taking dead bodies. He did say they smell bad, so maybe he got bored of taking dead bodies and wanted something live, because one time he went to a bar and he found someone there, the bar owner, Mary Hogan, and he was like taken back by how much he reminded her of his mum. And then a year later she went missing. But the frustrating thing is he literally told his workmate the next day, oh, I know where she is, she's hung up in my house. But no one believed him. And then 3 years later, this was his undoing. He went into, I need to read the name for this because I have no idea what it is, the local International Harvest Products shop, and bought antifreeze from the shop owner, Bernice Warden. And after completing his transaction, he took the rifle off the wall and he shot her and he dragged her out the back into his truck and took her home. It was pretty soon that the deputy sheriff caught on because it was his mum. So he went to her shop after he finished work to get lunch or something like that, and then he saw the rifle hanging off the wall, saw the bloody trail leading out the back, and the last receipt, which was made out to Ed Gein. So the next day, him and the sheriff went to Ed's house and literally caught him so red-handed in the most sad and gross way. I seriously feel bad for the deputy sheriff that he had to see his poor mum like this. You can see pictures of this as well. Like, you can look up the pictures and they're there, and it made me feel a feeling I've never felt before. She was hanging upside down, like beamed to a wooden beam and like cut from but this was like the least gross thing that they would see that day. After searching Ed's house, they found his house of horrors. In Ed's house, just to name a few things, there was an estimated 15 people's remains. He had fashioned them to be a chair upholstered in human skin, a belt fashioned from carved off nipples. His 4 bedposts were topped with skulls, 9 skin masks just hung on the wall, and a vest made from a woman torso that he admitted that he would put it on and other skin garments and pretend to be his mum. Ed is just a strange one. He was actually declared legally insane, which was one of the only serial killers. I actually think it was the only serial killer that I've researched that was actually legally insane. But hey, shit's crazy, and that you can see the pictures. Like, there's literally pictures of this on the internet. Very, very interesting stuff. And I'm just gonna briefly talk about Jeffrey Dahmer because I feel like you can't talk about cannibals and notorious serial killers without talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Through researching all these serial killers, I kind of found a pattern in their childhoods, but Jeffrey, his parents were pretty normal. Even he himself said he had very loving parents, and to blame his parents for what happened is just completely off the mark. It's pretty obvious to see that he didn't have a super abnormal childhood, but I'll just get into it anyway. So when he was younger, he was actually a happy and energetic child, but in just the space of 2 years, there was like 3 just kind of shifts, I guess you could call it. He had a surgery for his double hernia when he was 4 years old, which I looked up what a double hernia is, and it's not good. I saw pictures, it was rough. And then his parents were moving around quite a bit at this time as well, and also Jeffrey's younger brother, David, was born. His parents didn't really have a lot of time for him because his mother suffered from various mental health issues. Even when she was pregnant with Jeffrey, was consuming 27 pills a day, which none of the like individual pills were directly linked to any like pregnancy related issues. Yeah, so she was dealing with a lot, depression. She was even like institutionalized at some point when Jeffrey was young. And his dad was also a research chemist, which will come into play later, but he wasn't really around a lot as well because he was working a lot and moving around a lot, and him and his mum would fight a lot. So when his little brother was born, he was kind of competing over this already minimal attention that he was getting. So you see like isolation kind of and feelings of rejection kind of start from a young age. But another important thing to note is that when Jeffrey was younger, he took an interest in his father's work, which his dad really liked because he felt like he couldn't really connect with Jeffrey a lot. So when Jeffrey took an interest in his work, he showed him how to bleach freaking bones when he was like 10 years old, which retrospectively you're like, but at the time I guess you can't really understand because I guess we're not research chemists. I don't know. But him and Jeffrey would go under their house and get dead rodents and put them in bottles and wait for the connective tissue to disintegrate, and then you'd be left with these bones, and they would call them Jeffrey's fiddlesticks. But during high school, his parents got divorced at some point. Jeffrey was struggling with coming to terms with his homosexuality. He was having these sadistic impulses and fantasies, I guess you could call, that he was really uncomfortable with and was trying to like suppress, and just feelings of like not fitting in school. He was super shy and weird in school, but he was also like the class clown. But his classmates noted that like you could just see this decline in Jeffrey. He was coming to school drunk. He was like smuggling alcohol into school. His teachers even noticed. Oh, I forgot to tell you as well, there was this weird chilling anecdote from Jeffrey in grade school, whatever the frick that is. So in grade school, Jeffrey found a tadpole and he showed it to his teacher, but the teacher didn't trust it with Jeffrey for some reason. And so she gave it away to another classmate, and Jeffrey was just like so offended. Like he was like offended. And so after school he went to the classmate's house and he stole the tadpole, poured gasoline all over it and set it on fire. But then after graduation he killed his first person, which was an 18-year-old hitchhiker. It wasn't until 9 years later that he killed his second person, which he says he doesn't even remember doing. He just woke up and the body was there, but he still took it back to his grandma's house and sodomized it and cut it up. There was like a series of events of Jeffrey getting arrested for indecent exposure or masturbating in front of young boys. There was even a time where Jeffrey went to jail for a year because he sexually assaulted a 13-year-old boy that he thought was older, and he said this arrest has changed him and he's seen like he's gonna change his ways, but during the trial he literally killed someone. So, and rather than changing his tune after being arrested, he actually just got worse. He said it was a close call, I guess, and so he just took it as an opportunity to just completely let loose. I think he just saw that his time was running out. So he took quite a few victims in this 2-year period, and the most upsetting one to me was his 12th victim, which was a 14-year-old boy who just happened to be the younger brother of the guy that he went to jail for molesting before. This story is especially upsetting because he almost got caught. A woman in the neighborhood that he was living in actually called the police and said there was a naked young boy running around, seemingly drugged, and then when the police arrived, Jeffrey was seen holding the unconscious boy naked, who was literally 14 years old. And if the police had even bothered to look at his prior convictions or ask any questions at all, they could have saved that boy's life. But because it was a colored neighborhood and a seemingly homosexual domestic issue, they didn't want to get involved. Especially because at this time Jeffrey was seeing it as an opportunity to kind of act on his most like abhorrent sexual sadistic fantasies. He was doing like rough lobotomies with people. He started eating the flesh of his victims. He was experimenting with chemical disposal. Yeah, he was drilling their skulls while they were still alive and injecting them with hydrochloric acid. But then his last victim, which cost him his freedom, the boy just woke up and started running down the street and called the police, found the police, and the police went to Jeffrey's apartment. They did a little bit of a search and found Polaroids of naked boys, decapitated heads, and then arrested him and did a further search of the apartment and found basically Ed Gein shit in his house. There was like full heads in the fridge, like a heart that he said he was gonna eat later. There were skulls, a 57-gallon drum filled with acid containing 3 full torsos that were at different stages of decomposition. Jeffrey's, he's really interesting, especially because after he was just so transparent. I wrote down so many quotes because it was just so interesting how self-aware he was, and like he was just so transparent with how much of a psychopath he was. I'll just read a few because I won't freaking bore you with the millions of quotes I have. Yes, I've always had the sense that it was wrong. I don't think anybody can kill somebody and think that it's right. It's hard for me to believe that a human being could have done what I've done, but I know that I did it.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them.
Right.
Which completely just describes power and control killers, I feel like, in one quote. And then the last one I will share is, "It is now over."
It's never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I am so sorry for that, and sorry for everyone else that I have hurt. I have hurt my mother and father and stepmother. I love them all so very much. I hope that they will find the same peace I am looking for.
I don't know. He completely just knows that what he's done is wrong and almost feels bad about it, but he was just so swept by his own compulsion that he just didn't know what else to do. Everyone else especially thought that he was really messed up, and it was weird that he was a serial killer because his childhood was so normal, I guess. So Jeffrey's mum actually wanted his brain preserved after his death, and they could cut it up and see if there was any kind of like chemical or something there that shouldn't have been there that caused him to be a killer. But Jeffrey didn't want that to happen. He wanted to be cremated, so they did. I don't know, it would have been really interesting to like see if there was a chemical that's in your brain that like causes you to be like that regardless of your environmental factors. Anyway, moving on. The last person I'm going to talk about is disgusting. This bitch was actually the inspiration behind the Lady Gaga vampire character in American Horror Story. So judging off of that character, I'm sure you can assume there's going to be like some blood and some sacrificing people for her own good. This is our hedonistic comfort killer, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. I think that's how you say it. She was born in 1560 in Hungary, so I guess an element to it is gonna be hearsay. There was a lot of like folklore surrounding it. You can literally visit her castle and her torture chamber in, look, I'm not even gonna be able to pronounce it. Choctice. It's in Slovakia, so if you're ever in Slovakia, drop by. So yes, as I was saying, she was born in 1560. The rules, as I was saying before, were much looser than now, but not this loose. Also, I find it pretty ironic that she was born to one of the most powerful Protestant families in Hungary at the time during 1560, which, if you know anything about like the Protestant Reformation, this was in the middle of that. And I just find it ironic considering her entire family, this powerful Protestant family in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, was pretty much doing everything that they condemned the Catholic Church for doing, which was the reason for the Protestant Reformation in the first place. So yeah, that's a little interesting observation. But anywho, there's not a lot about Elizabeth's childhood that's known because it was freaking 450 years ago. What we do know is that she was likely a product of inbreeding. She also experienced quite a few seizures when she was younger and just fits of rage. But besides the inbreeding and seizures, her uncle would teach her about Satanism, and her auntie would teach her about sadomasochism. A masochist is someone who finds a pleasure in the pain of themselves. So a sadomasochist is like both of them. They just love pain. But as if she really needed to learn about sadomasochism from her auntie, because her family was quite renowned for their punishments, which Elizabeth as a child would just bear witness to like constantly. There was even this one specific event where a gypsy who was convicted of like theft or something like that, they literally sewed her into the belly of a dying horse and just left her to die in there. I don't even know how anyone could think of that. That's just the tip of the iceberg, guys. We're gonna get into it. Elizabeth was married at 15 to a Count Ferenc Nadasty. So Elizabeth and her mans moved out to the Nadasty castles, where they very quickly gained a reputation of their harsh punishments, much like her family. Elizabeth's mans like taught her tips and tricks, his little family secret, like his tips and tricks of how he would punish his servants. He also allegedly gave her a torture chamber. Does your mans give you a torture chamber? Try harder. But then he died, unfortunately. And even though it was said that they would indulge in torturing together, this only sent Elizabeth to just fully unleash. She moved to one of her castles and began to surround herself with a squadron of servants to aid in her torturing. And this is where the legend or the folklore of Countess Elizabeth Bathory really just sets in. So legend has it one day an attendant girl or one of her servants or just the people she would hire was brushing her hair when she accidentally pulled too hard and it tugged on a knot in Elizabeth's hair. Elizabeth raked out and smacked the girl so hard in the face that it drew blood, and the blood was left on Elizabeth's backhand. And then in the morning Elizabeth looked at it and her skin on the back of her hand just looked more youthful than it's looked in so long, and she just thought, oh my god, if this much blood can do this to the back of my hand, imagine what a lot of blood can do to my whole body, which is disgusting. And that's where the madness just began. It was said that she used to drink blood and would bathe in young girls' blood. Her target killing was 10 to 14-year-old girls. She started stealing them from the village. She would like prey on sad girls who maybe have run away or they were just like sad, and she would promise them this beautiful life if they would come and work with her in her castle, but they were just never seen again. When they arrived, Elizabeth would often lock them up in a cellar as they would just await their torture. Elizabeth would just either beat the girls to death or she would do special torture activities with them. Sometimes she would sew a girl's mouth shut or force them to eat their own flesh or burn their genitals. Or when she was too sick to get out of bed, she would get her servants to do the torturing for her, or she would get them to bring the girls up to her room so she could do it there. There were times where she would literally bite their faces, like bite chunks out of their faces, or she would stick needles underneath their fingernails, and if they tried to pull them out, she would chop their fingers off. But soon she started to run out of little girls to take from the villagers, because either she'd already taken them or they were in hiding, because she kind of gained a bit of a reputation around town. So Elizabeth decided to turn to noble girls. She only took one, and that just led to her demise, which honestly kind of pisses me off, because she took reportedly 650 girls, just village girls, and then she takes one noble woman, and they finally, King Matthias basically shut her down. And so they searched the entire castle and just found bodies everywhere. Some were missing arms and eyes, other bodies were in the fireplace, just like not burned fully. Just really sad stuff. So Elizabeth was taken to trial, and so many people testified against her. 300 witnesses gave testimony against her, including her own servants and survivors of her torture. It was even said that she took red hot fire pokers and shoved them into the mouth of one girl, and she placed her fingers in the mouth of another girl and pulled on the sides until they split open. So her servants were convicted on 80 counts of murder, and Elizabeth, and so her servants were killed, and Elizabeth was locked away in her tower like Rapunzel. She was like boarded up in this tower. There was like this tiny air hole for her to breathe and eat out of. After 3.5 years, she killed herself. Crazy freaking bitch. But the thing that pisses me off the most is that everybody knew what was going on, but they couldn't really launch an investigation because her family were in charge of the government, I guess, in their area. So they were just untouchable basically because of their noble rank, which kind of leads me into talking about just in general. I mean, even with all this like Pizzagate stuff, I'm not going to get too much into that because I don't want my life deleted. I've literally done so much research on this, but every time I go back to find that same article or the same pictures or whatever, it's just not there anymore. I mean, but if you guys know anything about it, there's a few podcasts on it and stuff like that. I'll leave some down below. I don't know, it's interesting because there is like, you know, you've got Jeffrey Epstein, and then you've got the Wayfair cabinets that are being marked as just outrageously expensive but named after the names of missing children. I mean, and how hard was it for Jeffrey Epstein to get prosecuted? Like, it's so frustrating. And if this year has taught me anything at all, it's just to expect the unexpected. There's so many things that have happened this year, or just that I've learned in general, that I'm like, how has that happened? Like, how are people actually like this? But it's probably naive to just believe that everybody follows the same set of like moral guidelines that you do as an individual person. That's why I kind of made this whole video, is just to question your initial thoughts. I mean, as like I just said, how long it took Jeffrey Epstein to get prosecuted, even though there was like blinding evidence, and even the Wayfair cabinet shit, like crazy stuff, and none of it's really like, it's all internet found, I guess. Like, it was people on the internet who found all of this evidence for Pizzagate and all that sort of stuff. And if you guys have seen Don't F With Cats, that series on Netflix, I mean, that above anything else has just shown me that everyday people on the internet finding this evidence and like digging into stuff is probably more believable than anything that the media would tell me. Like, you've got the cannibal cult of these elitists, which is like an elite group inside the elite group, and a lot of people say it's not real, but honestly I would believe anything at this point, because if there are serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer, take Jeffrey Dahmer for instance, or H.H. Holmes even. He said, H.H. Holmes on his deathbed, he was literally, his last words were, "I was born with the devil in me. I couldn't help the fact that I was born a serial killer as much as a poet can't help the inspiration to sing." And if that says anything, if you can be a serial killer in a social outcast aspect and experience all this trauma and abuse and just uncomfortable like environmental factors, you can be a serial killer if you're born into a rich white privileged family. So as much as Ed Gein was a cannibal in this poor family that he got abused in, I'm pretty sure these people are capable of being cannibals as well. Like, I'm sure of it. And when it's dealing with children and child pornography and like the exploitation of sex trafficking in children, like, they deserve to be taken seriously. So yeah, I just want to urge with you guys to challenge thoughts and always ask questions, always ask for more information. I mean, how frustrating is it that our justice system that is served to protect us can't even be consistent? How long did it take for them to convict Jeffrey Dahmer of murder, when he lit, like, someone who has gone to school drunk, set a tadpole on fire when he was in grade school, had prior convictions of molesting children, went to jail for molesting a child, raped 2 people while he was serving in the army, and then they're like, oh, what, he killed 30 people? But then you have, like, people getting killed for nothing, or convicted of crimes that they didn't commit, or put on death row for crimes that they didn't commit, or unworthy crimes. It's just so frustrating. Yeah, I just think it's really important to think about things and look for more, and always call things out if you feel like things aren't fair. So that's my video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you have anything that I got wrong or just a little more information, let me know. I love to learn. And get excited for more of these. I'm so excited. I'm gonna do more that, like, stuff down my alley, like some history shit and some freaking mermaids and dragons and stuff. So yeah, I love you guys. Thank you for watching. Hope you liked my Elliot Stapler jacket. I did, but it's pretty freaking hot in here. Okay, I love you. Bye.